Kathy Hochul is now New York State's first female ever elected to the office of governor. Some votes are still being counted, and we're going to have details on New York's historic midterm election. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. Most of the results are in for a lot of the races across the state. Top race being New York governor saw Kathy Hochul win that election. The race was close, a lot closer than a lot of folks thought it might be, with votes of Republican challenger Lee Zeldin keeping pace with the incumbent throughout election night. In all, Hochul won the race with 53% of the vote, Zeldin bringing in 47%. Voting pretty much matching up with the approval polls taken before Election Day, which showed Governor Hochul only maintaining a narrow lead over Lee Zeldin. Joining us now to give additional details surrounding New York's election on Tuesday, John Conklin with the Board of Elections. John, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure.
So let's talk turnout first. Primaries, as we know, are historically very low. This was a general election. It wasn't a presidential year, but a lot of big races on the ballot, especially the gubernatorial race. How was turnout?
I would say it was probably squarely in the middle of what we've seen recently for gubernatorial races. Unofficially, it's a little under 44%, 43.64 by my calculation right now. So 2018, it was a little over 49%. 2014, it was 33%. That's the lowest turnout we've had in recent years. Then 2010 was 40%, 2016 was 40%, 2002, pardon me, was 41%. If you go all the way back to 1994, that was the second Pataki Cuomo, or the first Pataki Cuomo, pardon me, was 60% turnout. So that's the last time you had a very good turnout. You had 5.3 million voters turn out out of 8.8 million registered voters for that year.
And when we take a look at early voting, which is still really new here for us in New York State, I think it's still proven to be very popular. Yes, this time around?
Yes, you had just under 1.2 million voters vote early voting this year, 1,178,000. That is about 48% from who did it 2 years ago when it was the highest. You had 2.5 million people vote in 2020 by early voting. That was 19.5%. But we've only had 4 years of early voting, so there is not a large sample to draw from there.
I think the last time you and I spoke, we talked briefly about security at the polls, and there were no major issues. There were some minor issues, though, when it came to machines not scanning ballots properly up in Warren County, and I know Suffolk County had some issues as well. They suffered a ransomware attack back in September, but I believe we found that that was not the reason for any delays in counts there, correct?
Correct. In Suffolk County, you had a situation where they had put a plan in place to collect election night totals at multiple central locations throughout the county. They had tested that plan before Election Day, but when Election Day came, they found it wasn't working quite the way they wanted it to. I think there was a recent article down there suggesting that the security firewall they had set up was a little too secure, and so the results were coming in much slower than they had anticipated. So they switched gears and went to collecting the sticks physically, bringing them back to the central board in Yaphank. So that took a little bit of time on election night. So results started to appear because we were hosting their election results website for them. So results started to appear a little after midnight there. And I just want to go back a second to what you said earlier. I think the issue with the ballots that weren't scanned properly was a little bit of a quality assurance issue. That was in Washington County, not Warren County.
Correct.
They had ballots where the margins and the timing marks were off, so they had to run some new ballots on Election Day. Those were hand canvassed. There was a court order that was handed out on Election Day that was obeyed completely. So in the end, there weren't any issues in Washington County, but they They followed all the procedures, and everything worked there as it should.
Exactly, and folks were let known even if they had filled out one of those ballots that didn't scan properly, that vote still counts because those forms get locked away, correct, in a separate area, and they get counted manually.
Correct. Anyone who voted and their ballot wasn't scanned by them into the scanner was put into a secure box that was held, and then those ballots were hand canvassed later that day.
And I know everybody is always looking for results right away, right? We live in this society where everybody wants things immediately, but we're still counting absentee ballots, and I know there still are some races out there, at least a couple of them, especially when it comes to New York State Senate, that are really on the line here, and those absentee ballots are going to make the difference for some folks. But people just need to, exercise some patience.
Yes, that's true, and the media is one of those people that needs to exercise patience. But we have about 560,000+ absentees were sent out, and at last count, which was Friday before Election Day, about 330,000 had been returned, give or take. So the boards right now are going through their regular post-election tasks. So what they do immediately is a recanvass of all the machines to make sure that their Election Day totals were accurate. Then they prepare the absentee ballots that are still coming in post-Election Day. Anything that was postmarked on Election Day can still come in and be counted. Those ballots are prepared. They're reviewed to make sure that there's no mistakes that need to be cured. Then they prepare them for scanning. In addition, any affidavit ballots that were processed, or sometimes they're referred to as emergency or provisional ballots, that were done during early voting or on Election Day, those have to be processed, and they are sent up to the state board this weekend. We do a clearinghouse to make sure that no one double voted in any place. After that, they'd be retrieving the machines from their poll sites. They would be conducting a 3% random audit of all the machines that are used on Election Day. They complete the count of the absentee ballots. So if you're if you voted through a domestic absentee, it can come in till next Tuesday. If you are a military voter, you have until November 21st for your ballot to come in and be counted. Then after all of that is done and the boards are just about ready to certify their results, then they would check to see if there's any where an automatic recount was triggered. If you have a contest where the winner and the loser is the margin of victory is less than 0.5%, that would trigger an automatic recount. That's a new law from a couple of years ago. So they would have to determine that. Then they would conduct the automatic recount. Then they would certify their results and send them up to the state board. And then we expect to certify statewide results at our board meeting on December 15th.
There you go. So everybody take a deep breath. The results will come through.
They will. That's exactly right. So,
especially for us here in the news.
Like you said, there's a couple of Senate races that are close.
Yeah.
There's a couple of congressional races that are close, and there's a few judicial districts that are close as well. So there could be the possibility for hand recounts, which I would say probably would take place the first week of December if we have to do them.
Okay.
The 4th JD, the 3rd JD, and I think the 9th JD have the potential for that right now. That could change over the next few weeks as the absentees are counted, so the margin could move out of the 0.5%, but right now we're watching those.
Excellent. John Conklin from the State BOE. As always, we thank you for your time and your insight. Thanks, John.
Sure, my pleasure.
Well, the midterm saw an opportunity for Republicans to shift the balance of power in New York State Senate. We'll have the key races set to determine if Democrats keep or lose that supermajority there. And remember, if you've got a comment, story idea you'd like us to follow, let us know. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. Keeping with the midterms now, recent redistricting across the state means some significant impacts for the balance of power. Republicans looking to gain a majority here in the state Senate. Here's a breakdown. Democrats need to hold on to at least 42 seats to maintain that super majority. Right now they have 40. Two remaining races are too close to call. We're talking the 17th district, where Republican Vito LaBella slightly trailing the incumbent Democrat Ewan Chu, While in the 50th Senate District, Republican Rebecca Schroff leads the incumbent Democrat John Mannion by less than 400 votes. Super close. If both those races go to the Democrats, of course, they retain that super majority. If Republicans win just one of them, the Dems lose it. Recently sat down with Grant Rear from Syracuse University, political science professor there, to get a little bit more insight on this and the races nationally as well.
All right, Dr. Rear, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about midterm elections on Tuesday. Right now, the Democrats enjoy what is known as a supermajority in Albany, and it really gives them the ability to override a gubernatorial veto, correct?
That's right. That's right. And that supermajority may be in danger.
And what does that mean for the Democrats and Governor Hochul really in the long term? I mean, it doesn't really mean, I would think, all that much as long as they're always on the same page.
That's right. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that there's going to be some sort of knockdown, drag out battle between the majority of the Democrats, particularly in the state Senate, which I think is fair to say a little more the left of the state assembly, and the governor about something. Because if there was that level of conflict, there'd be other problems than whether they were going to override a veto. I mean, I think those problems would have to get sorted out in negotiations. And so I don't really see this as having an effect on policy one way or another. It may give a little bit of leverage to the governor if something really got conflictual, but otherwise we're really talking about something at the margins. The fact remains is they're going to have really healthy majorities in both chambers.
Yeah, and a lot of people would argue they'd rather see a healthier split, not seeing one party have so much control over state government isn't necessarily a good thing.
Well, that's certainly true. And it's particularly true if you're one of the citizens of New York who have deep concerns about where the state has been going in terms of its taxing and spending over recent decades. So, I think it's a bipartisan source of concern that the state is always either ranked number one or in the top 3 or 4 of states for tax burdens. And so, it's a perennial issue. And I think, frankly, in understanding why the red wave that didn't happen across the country did sort of happen in New York, is I think concerns about the economy and the inflation tapped into some of those longstanding concerns in New York State. Question is what the governor and the legislature do about it.
Crime was a big issue for a lot of folks too, and really seemed to be what the Republicans were really hanging their hat on during this election cycle. A lot of people were surprised at how close the gubernatorial contest was. Do you think it was kind of, in some ways, and we can talk more national big picture stuff in a moment, but a referendum on that and that sort of Trumpism thing, where you saw a lot of candidates who had kind of distanced themselves from the former president seemed to fare better. Lee Zeldin ran a lot of heavy crime ads that drew some controversy throughout the campaign. Do you think that played any sort of role in how people voted here?
My own take is that actually there's an irony here, is that Lee Zeldin did as well as he did despite his ties to Trump, not because of them. And I think it really plays into the two things we've been talking about. One is the concerns about crime and public safety, and the other thing is the concerns about the economy and, New York State's economic competitiveness and the economic environment in New York State. And so I think that really put some wind in his sails. That race was 15 points closer than it should have been on paper. And then also, I think, led to some of the congressional results where, New York actually did see some Republican flipping of seats, whereas the rest of the country didn't see much of that. And then also some of these losses of seats in the state legislature. So that's what I chalk it up to. And I think it's gonna be really interesting to see what the governor does with her next 4 years.
Well, she rode into this with some big announcements, right? The Micron deal out there in Syracuse, IBM announcing their big multi-billion-dollar investment down there in the Hudson Valley. So she's really counting on those high-tech jobs. And as we know, state government's really been putting a lot of eggs in that tech basket. ever since they, brought foundries here and the tech campus at UAlbany. That's been a big deal here.
Yeah, and there's a little wrinkle though on that Micron one that I think is worth noting. So that took place within the 22nd congressional district, and it was something that Francis Knoll, the Democrat, emphasized, and Kathy Hochul was up here with President Biden to talk about it. It didn't seem to help him as the Democrat, and Brandon Williams, the Republican, who looks like he's going to have a tremendous upset here in the 22nd district, was on record as opposing the national legislation that made that chip deal possible. So here's what I take out of this. Those things are great in and of themselves. Micron is great for Syracuse. Syracuse, in a sense, got quote unquote lucky with that. But that doesn't mean that New York State's approach toward economic development is the right one. And that is the state putting out lots of big tax breaks and betting on certain companies and certain industries and trying to pick winners and losers, versus what the Republicans are emphasizing is make the state more generally competitive for business. And so I don't know if that argument on the Democratic side, when it comes to economic development, really has persuaded a lot of citizens, because there's been a lot of boondoggles as well. And we can add those up in Syracuse and elsewhere. And Andrew Cuomo had some problems with some of the claims that he was making about that kind of economic development.
And we shouldn't forget that a vast majority of the state is agricultural.
That's correct. And those things, will help these areas, but they're not necessarily going to make more farmers or give them a better ability to conduct their business. And so the issue with the overtime payments for the transitory workers, the temporary workers here in New York State, was something that had farmers very upset.
Good information. Dr. Rear, thank you so much for your time and your insight. We really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. Happy to help anytime.
Well, that predicted big win by Republicans really didn't happen this midterm. Congress may see a shift with Republicans taking some congressional seats back. When we return, the details on how several key flips in the House will impact legislation on the national level. And remember, if you've got a comment, story idea, please let us know. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. On the national level, while there wasn't that big national red wave as Republicans were hoping and many predicted, when it comes to New York State, Republicans were able to flip some congressional seats. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine breaks it all down for us.
New York, a typically blue state, will be sending more Republican representatives to Congress in the new year.
The big red wave that people were expecting across the country didn't happen, except in New York. It did happen here.
Some House seats previously held by Democrats have now gone Republican.
Well, we were able to flip 2 seats on Long Island. We were able to flip 2 seats in the Hudson Valley. So there's 4. We're extremely proud of all of these races. Again, the largest delegation in at least 20 years from New York, 11 of 26 seats. We're a dark blue state, and we've performed very well.
Democratic Congressman Paul Tonko, who won his race, says he's disappointed Democrats came up short in a handful of New York races. He stated, quote, "I remain frustrated that one person was given the power this summer to draw New York's congressional maps for the next 10 years, which made many races unwinnable for some progressive candidates." Grant Reher, a political science professor at Syracuse University, doesn't believe redistricting played a big role. He explains why he thinks this happened.
There's been a long-standing concern about where New York is going as a state in terms of its taxes, in terms of its spending, in terms of its style of government. And so I think those broader national economic concerns kind of hit the long-standing New York concerns about those things.
Reher says the midterm elections are now putting New York State more at the center of a nationwide political conversation.
The difference maker was New York in this instance. And so those seats, first of all, are going to be targeted by Democrats to take back in the next election, but they're also going to be seen as very important by the Republicans.
In Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
All right, stick around. We're going to be right back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. Finally, from us here on Empire State Weekly, New Yorkers passed all 3 of the statewide ballot proposals that were in front of them during the midterm election. Next week, we'll be keeping an eye on one of those proposals, the Environmental Bond Act. The proposal will make a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar investment in the state's environment, including money to add new water infrastructure, protect the environment, and mitigate some effects of climate change. We'll have those details on how that proposal could be rolled out across New York. We discuss it more next week. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. We'll see you back here next week. And don't forget, you can catch us all over New York. Here's our full schedule where you can see us on 10 television stations across New York.